We're better in community. We're better together. The body of Christ, we all have our different parts.
Right.
There's just no I in team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we were created for community. We were made for community. And it just seems like the more I think about it, the more all of God's creation. I mean, if you look at plants do better when planted together.
Yep.
Ants work together. And then the bees and then the church. And I feel like community, we're all better together.
Welcome to The Home and the Maker, sharing advice and encouragement about all topics homemaking and homesteading, and honoring the maker in all of it. Join Megan from Shine.fm for today's conversation.
If you've ever considered beekeeping, this episode is for you. It's something my husband and I are curious to get into for our future homestead. And so I'm excited to ask all the questions and learn especially about the initial investment of actually starting beekeeping. And I've invited Joy, a beekeeper herself from Northwest Indiana, to join me for this conversation all about bees. So thank you so much, Joy.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me first about your just venture into beekeeping. Why did you start? How big is your hive? Just kind of a general background of what things look like for you.
Sure. I do a little bit of homesteading myself. I have a pretty large garden. I was doing some composting and studies on that. And my mom had heard about a class offered at the library, a free informational meeting. So we thought we would go check it out. And it really didn't tell us a whole lot. However, after that, everybody was like, oh, you're getting into beekeeping. And I started getting books and gifts and all this. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm getting into beekeeping. So just kind of all fell into line.
I love that. So it kind of happened naturally for you. How big is your hive now?
We started out, we're going into our fourth year. So we started out about 4 years ago with 2 hives. And we purchased what they call nukes or nucleus colonies. They're miniature colonies with a queen and brood of all stages with some workers and that sort of thing. So we started out with 2 of those, and they just quickly expanded from there. So currently we have 10 colonies.
Wow.
And working on what we call splits and managing the hives and all that to prevent swarming, but yet build honey and that sort of thing. So anyhow, it's grown quite a bit in the last 4 years for sure.
That's amazing. So when you first started and you're like, okay, we're going to do this, what was that initial, basically, did it cost a lot up front to get into this?
Well, I am a Dutchman and I married a Dutchman. So
Yes, me too.
trying to be frugal throughout this whole thing. I started out, I wasn't even sure if my husband was going to participate in this. And I did not want to inconvenience him with assembling of the hardware and maintaining it and all that. So I wanted to make sure that this was something I could do on my own. And I decided to go with a brand that is a plastic made called Apame. And they have 10 frame hives or 7 frame hives. And I knew with my weaker back that 7 frames would be much easier to lift and manage than 10. But yeah, it was a decision that I knew it was going to be more costly up front, but I wanted the long haul to be cheaper. So I saved up birthday money and Mother's Day money, and Christmas money. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm spending my money on. So the Apames are a little bit more expensive. They're probably about double what your woodenware would be. I would say starting out, you would probably want 2 D boxes and 2 medium boxes. The medium boxes are reserved for honey production. And that can run about $400. And then, of course, you got to purchase your bees as well. And the nucleus of bees runs right around $200. So
Okay.
looking at just your equipment and bees, $600. But then, of course, you've got your smoker and your hive tools and your suits and all that. So it does add up.
Yeah.
But like I said, I tried to be a little frugal with my gift money and savings and so, yeah, that's how I started out.
Gotcha. Now, what does the time investment look like? Are there certain seasons that are busier than others? Is there like a weekly time commitment? How does that look?
Absolutely. It depends. I mean, everything you read about in beekeeping, the answer is always going to be it depends. There are people that want to stay on top of it and they don't like to procrastinate. And so they will be efficient and they are in their bees on a very timely manner, roughly once a week. And then there's others that are just like, well, you know what, whatever happens, happens. If it swarms, it swarms. If I see an issue, then I'll take care of it. We tend to be a little bit more proactive. So we try to prevent the issues before they happen. So we are in our bees every 7 to 10 days. And it is an extensive, it's a timely thing, especially when you're first starting out and learning to, what it is you're looking for. You're pretty much looking for nutrition, resources, room for the queen to keep laying, and the overall quality of the hive. So you're looking at every frame, in all the boxes and assessing, and it is a little time consuming.
Yeah. Wow.
And May is definitely the busiest time of year, I believe, because coming out of winter, they have a lot of brood that is being made and getting ready to emerge. And then those boxes fill up really quickly. And if you're not on top of it, they will swarm. So May is a very busy month for that.
So describe the swarming for me. I mean, I can envision it, but having no knowledge of this whatsoever, is it basically, I'm imagining, all the bees swarming around the hive, but what happens with that? What is the result of that?
The result is that you usually lose about 50 to 60% of your bees.
Wow.
Possibly more. Sometimes you'll have cast off swarms. So they won't just swarm once. You'll get a second group from that colony that decides to swarm, or a third group that decides. So you could virtually be left with almost nothing.
Wow.
Basically, you have some workers that are going out and searching for a new location. And this is their reproduction. This is how they grow. They grow and expand, and this is their goal in life. So, as a beekeeper, you just want to kind of manage that and contain them, because you want to keep the surplus and you want to expand. And so, if you want to prevent the swarming, you either split the hive and make two, or you give them room to grow, because essentially that's what they're doing. They're outgrowing their space.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. With 10 hives now, right? 10 hives.
Yes.
How much honey do you get a year? And what do you do with it all?
Okay. So we have actually only harvested honey once. The first year they recommend not harvesting honey, because they encourage you to use that honey for winter feed for your bees. They're starting out, they're new, they haven't built up a lot of resources. So they encourage you not to harvest the honey the first year. Save it for the bees to get them through winter. So that's what we did the first year. The second year we did harvest. I think it was in August we harvested, and we had, I want to say 4 colonies that we harvested from. And we got a 5-gallon bucket full of honey. So that was fun. And that was pretty much for us. Since it was our first time harvesting, we didn't sell it. We didn't feel right about selling honey on our practice run, and then last year, our third year, we were focusing on expanding our apiary. So we divided up, split up our hives, and then we kind of took the honey that they made and divided it out. So again, we didn't harvest. We let them have it for the winter. But then this year, we're hoping to harvest again. So yeah.
Wow. So you could be looking at like 2 5-gallon buckets.
Possibly, quite possibly, God willing.
So how do you store all that? Are you just kind of keeping it in jars somewhere in the house to use as needed?
Yeah, we're storing them in glass mason jars, pint jars. And we have a little cabinet little decorative cabinet in our kitchen that we have all our honey supply in. So that's currently where it's at. My husband is very much the detail-oriented organizer. So he does very well with that. He's very neat and clean and particular with how things are done. And so he's been a huge help with all that. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. So when you are purchasing the nuclear colony of bees, like where did you look for that? Just buy it online?
Okay, so when you get into beekeeping, they highly recommend getting into a club, reading lots of books and videos, and then getting a mentor. So that's what I did. I started out finding a local club, getting into the mentorship program, and that is where I found my nucleus colonies of bees that I was able to purchase from. So the club that I'm in is very educational based, and they want to train up new beekeepers. And so the mentor that I had was phenomenal. He invited us out at any time to come and see his hives and work in his hives when he was out there. And so we purchased from him, and he was actually from maybe 15 minutes away from our house. So
Okay.
Local is always best. If you purchase online, especially from a company further south, a lot of times those bees are not acclimated to the weather. So they often die, or they ship out at the wrong time, and it's too cold, and they're just not strong enough to endure our winters that we have here up in the Northwest. So
Gotcha. That makes sense. How many bees come in that nucleus colony?
roughly 3 pounds.
Okay.
You'll start off with five. Normally most nucleus colonies will have 5 frames. You'll have 2 resource frames with like nectar or honey and pollen, and then you'll have 2 frames with brood, whether it's eggs and larvae or capped brood, and then you'll have a queen. And then they usually shake 2 or 3 frames of nurse bees onto that as well. So you'll have a whole working mini colony right there.
Yeah.
So it's roughly 3 pounds.
Wow. Okay.
Don't ask me how many bees that is. I'm not quite sure how many, but
No, I'm just like, wow, this is information I had no idea about. So
it is definitely a lot more to it than I anticipated, for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a huge rabbit hole. It is very addicting, and you just go down all sorts of things. So yes.
So they obviously hibernate and come back. That was gonna be my question. Like, are you ever worried about losing bees over the winter or over the summer if they go fly away and start a new colony? But I guess most of them are staying with the hive.
Yeah, I believe we've lost one colony to swarming. It was in my first year, and I wasn't quite adding the numbers up. I knew what I was looking at. I just didn't realize that numbers had been dropping from previous weeks and that sort of thing. So the signs were there. I just didn't know how to read the signs.
Got it.
So we did lose at least one to swarming, but it was a strong enough colony that we were able to keep the second half of that colony. The winter is a whole nother thing. I'm sure maybe you haven't. There's a varroa mite that is a danger to the bees. And these mites, they are visible to the eye, but a lot of times they're on the underside of the bee, and they get in between the little sections of the bee. So they're very difficult to see. But these mites carry lots of diseases and viruses. Okay. So you want to keep the mite count down because you want to keep that viral load down. So going into winter, the main thing that we are looking for in the fall is to make sure those mite counts are down and at a reasonable level going into winter. Because if you have the hive mites, you're going to have the high viral load, and winter is a stressful time. They do go into a torpor hibernation state, but then the viruses, if you're sick and cold and you get the flu or something and you're under the weather to begin with, it just all acclimate, it just all adds up, and
Right.
And they just don't always make it.
Yeah.
So we have lost a few colonies over the winter. Like this past winter, we went into winter with 8 colonies, and we lost 1. So we came out of winter with 7, and that was on us. We totally understood it was the mites. You could see the bees on the bottom board. You could see the mites on the bottom board. It was just something that we were having a really hard time getting under control going into September and October. So
Gotcha. So how do you control for something like that? Like if you can hardly see them, like what kind of, I guess, procedures or things do you do to limit that?
There's a few different ways you can test for that. Some people do the sugar roll test. Some people do an alcohol wash. We do something similar to an alcohol wash, except we use soap water, which has been shown to be just about as effective. So we have like a sieve that fits inside of a container.
Yeah.
You're going to scoop up some nurse bees and throw them in there. And in that container is going to be soapy water. You swish them around in some soapy water, and then the mites dislodge and fall down to the bottom through that sieve. And you can count the mites on the bottom. And so when you're done, you count the bees compared to the number of mites, and you can get a percentage of how many mites are in there. So that's kind of, you lose about 300 bees in the process, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like drawing blood. It doesn't hurt the grand scheme of the colony. It's just a small price to pay for the overall health of the colony. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how we kind of test. And
Wow.
we do that about once a month just to kind of stay on top of the mite numbers so that if we see the mite numbers are increasing, um, there's a whole variety of methods that you can use to control that as well. And I want to put a plug into Honeybee Health Coalition because they have a very detailed step-by-step process where it'll go through a questionnaire of scenarios regarding your colony, your environment, your situation, and then it kind of gives you the best layout for preventative measures or measures to take. We often use oxalic acid and we use it in a dribble form. So when we see our mite numbers are high, we'll use a ratio of the oxalic acid to sugar water, and we kind of dribble it down between the frames of the bees and treat it that way. And then that oxalic acid actually attacks the mites because the mites have almost like a rubber silicone suction cup, and that's how they attach to the bees. And it gets into their suction cup feet, and then it inhibits them from attacking the bees. So anyhow, it's a very scientific, detailed thing, and I'm not really sure exactly how to explain it all, but that's the overall general idea of the treatment. So
Gotcha. Okay.
there's lots of different kinds of treatments. That's just kind of the one that we tend to stick with the most. And yeah, there's a threshold. So if you see that your mite percentage is usually above 2 or 3%, that's when you know you need to start thinking about treating. If it's over 3%, you want to start treating for mites.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you mentioned having a big garden, a little bit of homesteading. So have you noticed a difference maybe with having bees and now like looking at your garden and have you noticed that it's thriving more because you have your own population of bees, or is there any difference really that you've seen?
Well, we live out in the country to begin with, but I think the biggest difference I saw was with my strawberry patch. I had started the strawberry patch a few years earlier, and I just wasn't sure what was going on with the strawberries. Like they would form, but they would seem kind of mushy and like they just didn't look the greatest. There was a lot of them that weren't very mushy, and I was doing some research and it looked like that it was a pollination issue.
Oh.
So yeah, after getting the bees, I don't see that near as much. So I'm assuming that the bees are helping in that regard. We do have some apple trees and pear trees. Now, whether or not the bees are helping, I'm sure they are, but we have an issue with the deer. So there again, it's kind of hard to determine, if the bees are doing their job when the deer get to the fruit before we do. But
Yeah.
the garden, I plant a lot of perennials and a lot of herbs and stuff, flowering herbs that the bees like. I do see them in there quite a bit, a lot. So that's always fun and interesting to watch and get distracted by.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really had that big of a pollination issue in my garden to begin with. So to compare the before and after, I'm not sure how I could do that. But yeah. I've seen some of the effects, and it's interesting nonetheless. So
Yeah. What are some of their favorites? Like you mentioned the herbs. What are some of their favorite ones to like be attracted to?
I see them a lot on the catmint and the Russian sage. And I'm gonna butcher this name. It's like agaste or something like that. It's a flowering I don't even know if it's an herb. It's just a flowering plant that I have. And then the black-eyed Susans, I see them on the purple cone flowers and the black-eyed Susans quite a bit too. So
Gotcha. Oh, that's so fun. So when you extracted all of the honey from the hive a couple years ago, how long of a process was that? Was basically we are setting aside this day because it's honey day, or how long did that take?
Well, since it was our first time, we set aside the day for it. I think we started maybe late morning, and then probably finished mid-afternoon. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 4 hours from start to finish. But, there's a lot of it's the prep time, just like painting. You want to prep everything first, and that seems to take the most time. So the actual harvesting wasn't too bad. And then the cleanup is fairly easy because you just, whatever is kind of dirty, you can set outside and let the bees come and clean it up. So that's kind of nice, you know?
Yeah. You said so May is busy season and then harvest time is
There can be two different times for harvest. You can harvest midsummer and then you can harvest at the end of summer, depending
okay.
on, we usually wait till the end of, well, I shouldn't say usually, we did wait till the end of the summer because we wanted to kind of gauge how much honey was left for the winter.
Mhm.
We didn't want to take our chances by harvesting midsummer and being like, oh, we shouldn't have taken that much, you know?
Yeah.
But I think as we get more experienced and we start to learn how much honey they're going to be making and storing, we'll be able to do a early harvest and then maybe a later harvest. So
Gotcha. That's cool. So are there any other external threats that you've had to be careful of, like birds or other things that could possibly prey on the bees?
yeah, there's everything from pesticides to other insects. There's a small hive beetle that can kind of get an infestation going and make a mess of the hive. Some of the precautions for that is to lay down salt on the ground because they kind of burrow in the ground and then lay the eggs and hatch out. So, but then we found that if you do that, a lot of times deer like salt
Oh,
and deer like to come in and rub up against hives and they can knock them over. And
oh,
even skunks or possums or raccoons will come and they smell the honey. So they'll be scratching at the entrance of the hive.
okay.
And so they recommend elevating the hive about a foot and a half off the ground so that these predators have to get up on their hind feet and their belly is exposed. So then once they start scratching, the bees come and attack the vulnerable
Mm,
underside. And mice, wintertime is a big time for mice to try get in. They have mouse guards that you can install and help keep the mice out. Because once mice get in there, you know, they like to destroy everything as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different
yeah.
things that you got to kind of keep an eye out for.
Okay. Gotcha. Um, Now with your family, I don't know if you have like young kids around, but how do you navigate, especially like for me growing up, I was so afraid of bees. Like, are they flying around more so in your yard, or how do you navigate that?
I mean, you see them more in the yard. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily flying around more in our yard, but I mean, you notice them. I do have two daughters, and one of them's moved out of the house, and the other one's 20. So,
Yeah.
and neither one of them are interested at all in beekeeping. So, that's not much of an issue. The bees do look for a water source.
Okay.
A lot of times it can be a pool nearby. We try to set out a separate bowl or a container of water, and I've actually seen like a whole ring of bees sitting around the edge of this container, looking, you know, drinking the water, and it's really cool. So it's just little things like that, and then you just know that that's going to be their flight of traffic, their line of traffic. So you just kind of want to keep that line of traffic out of, you know, where you might have visitors or people coming
Yeah.
through. You don't want that to be the pathway. When we do a little bit of work with, let's say we have got some frames that we want cleaned out. Our colonies are a little bit of a distance away from the house, but we'll set these frames out by the house. And then we do have a lot more activity with the bees and all that there. So, I mean, it doesn't take them long, just an hour or two before they start finding these things and working on them. So, you know, situations like that, you will have more bees around the house. But it's definitely stuff you can work with, you
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
and plan ahead for. So,
Yeah. All righty. Now, my favorite question of all. So, as you have gotten this experience with bees and studied about them and watched them as you've worked with them, like what has this taught you about God or what has he revealed to you?
I've been thinking about this one. Um, I think, and I just thought about this today. I think the big thing is that we work better together. Like
Mm.
you have the entire colony, and there's no one worker bee that's more important than anything else. I mean, yeah, you have the queen, but really the queen doesn't do anything other than lay eggs. It's like all the other workers that are feeding the larva and the egg, and not the eggs, but they're feeding the larva, they're caring for the young, they're foraging for. So it's like the entire system as a whole, and it just kind of seems like that's how everything was created to be. Like we're better in community, we're better together. the body of Christ, we all have our different parts.
Right.
There's just no I in team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we were created for community. We were made for community. And it just seems like the more I think about it, the more all of God's creation. I mean, if you look at plants do better when planted together.
Yep.
Ants work together. And then the bees and then the church. And I feel like community, we're all better together. So that's kind of what I was thinking about anyhow.
No, I love that. I mean, it makes so much sense. I mean, exactly what the Bible tells us as far as needing the body of Christ and needing each other. So that's
how we grow, and that's how we get stronger. So
yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Joy. I appreciate you sharing all of the wisdom and all the behind the scenes of beekeeping that I'm going to have to go research now.
Thank you so much stuff. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Home and the Maker podcast. And for other podcasts from Shine.fm, visit the Shine.fm podcast channel.